So welcome. I'm joined today by Cynthia Cherrey and Stefanie Johnson. Cynthia Cherrey serves as the president and CEO of the International Leadership Association, the world's largest professional organization dedicated to advancing leadership. Under her guidance, the ILA fosters a global community committed to elevating the quality of leadership research, teaching, and practice. With members spanning diverse sectors and regions, the ILA continues to lead the charge in shaping the future of leadership on a global scale. Stefanie Johnson is Associate Professor and Director of the Center for Leadership at the University of Colorado Boulder. She also served as the chair of the recent Future Forward Leadership Summit in Boulder, Colorado, and was instrumental in making that summit the great success that it was. Today, we turn our attention to that summit, where more than 120 leading experts from around the world converged to discuss one pressing question: what does the future of leadership look like? This exclusive event brought together top researchers and practitioners in leadership, all focused on navigating the challenges and opportunities ahead. So, Cyn, I'd love to start with you and ask you what inspired the idea for this remarkable summit?
Well, thank you, Jeffrey. And Jeffrey, it's so good to be here with you again. And one of the things that Jeffrey hasn't talked about is he was on the board of the International Leadership Association a few years ago and also chaired a conference for us that was in Amsterdam. So it was good. One of the things that the ILA does so well is to connect people. And it was good to reconnect with you, Jeffrey, at the Future Forward Summit. And this idea emerged through a number of conversations that good ideas often do. We were talking with a number of colleagues at the last conference, which was in Vancouver. And then we were also celebrating 25 years of the International Leadership Association and the conversation of how young this discipline is, and also how much has changed in the field of leadership over the last 25 years. And so we started talking, in particular with one of my great thought leaders, Stefanie, about what can we do to look at the next 25 years in the field of leadership, and what are the trends we need to look at that leadership research and leader development needs to address moving forward. So really through conversation, sitting down with coffee with Stefanie, we really discussed this idea and the possibility of this conference being hosted at University of Colorado Boulder, where, what better place to think of big ideas than when you're, 5,000 feet in the air at the University of Colorado.
The only thing I would add to that is, I teach students, I'm a professor, and so I'm always teaching classes, but then I also work with a lot of leaders and organizations and through the ILA, but also through other work that I do. And I'm always struck by just the lag time between what we're teaching in the classroom and what's happening in organizations. And so I feel like we're preparing students for leadership 20 years ago rather than 20 years from now, when they're going to really need that. And I think just the time it takes to go from ideas to action in academia is slow. And so maybe we need a shift in the way we think about preparing leaders to say, like, rather than let's prepare them for what they used to do, or let's prepare them for what they're doing now, maybe let's prepare them for the needs that they're going to face, I don't know, 25 years from now, but in their recent futures after graduation.
Yeah, and how we can accelerate that transition.
What were some of the objectives? What were the goals of this summit? What were you trying to achieve as you put on this summit?
I think there were a number of them. The first was how do we think about the goals we're really to think about, the trends moving forward, right? What are those big global challenges, but also the local challenges that we need to address and think about, not just today, but reaching out 25 years from now. So, for example, we know there's a considerable amount of conversation about AI. Well, what does that really mean in the field of leadership, right? Because everything we're doing is through the lens of leadership. So one was, let's look at the trends that need to be addressed. And then second is, how can leadership theory and concepts and leader development help to address and meet the needs of those trends moving forward? How can leadership really help to activate or be actionable in those areas? And the third, which is at the premise and the core of the ILA, is to bring together the best thinkers and doers through the lens of leadership to talk about this and to come forward with ideas and insights.
I think tactically, when we're trying to design the conference, I feel like the day-to-day, what's going to happen at each minute. I feel like, to add to what Cyn said, I think it was hearing more voices. And so we actually started this process with a survey of all ILA members. Not everyone completed the survey, but we asked the community, what are the topics that we need to tackle at this meeting? And so, there's plenty of research articles out there that say this is, future research to do this, and these are the things we need to consider for the future. But it's, maybe by a smaller subset of community members that we hear those thoughts from. So we wanted to expand the aperture a bit to hear from more people. And that's how we framed out what we would discuss at the meeting. And then the second thing is, I think professors are sometimes criticized for navel gazing. We sit and think about, we just think, and that's kind of our job, right? I can say, what did you do this week? Oh, I had really deep thoughts, and that's acceptable. But obviously that's not the case for practitioners and business people. You have to move to action. And so we try to really have some solid, like, what are we going to do after this to make sure that the process continues? And it wasn't just a great, inspiring experience for the people there, but it actually pushes the field forward. And then the third thing that I really thought I wanted to, have a big goal was connection from the beautiful ILA thought leaders on the academic side and the practitioner side, to bring them together and hopefully form collaborations and thought partnership. And that, I think, came out loud and strong at the meeting, was the need and the desire for that from both sides. Not that it's divided, but, I think everyone shared that sentiment of, we need to do better about translating research into practice, but also using insights from practitioners who I think tend to be more on the cutting edge than the hardcore academics.
The ILA members are on this continuum of, many of them are academics and great thought leaders like you are, Stefanie, and also the ability to translate and also do and are actionable and do work in the field, in corporate or in nonprofit, or others who are in that corporate or nonprofit who also are getting their doctorate or are teaching leadership, right? So we have this continuum, but what you and the planning team did so well in this conference is to shape the space, to create the trusted space, so that there was this intentional interaction around key questions. And so creating that space intentionally is what I thought moved it to the next level. And having a smaller venue, right? 120, 125 is a good number to really come together and think creatively together.
Well, let's talk about the warm-up to the conference itself, which was led by two really great keynote speakers. We had the culture futurist Theo Edmonds, and we had Dr. Rebecca Reichard. who gave a presentation the day of the conference. Just wondering how those presentations, in your opinion, shaped the tone of the event, and what were specific insights from those two keynotes that particularly impressed you?
Theo is not an academic, although he does currently work in a university, but he's really a practitioner. I think he has a multitude of different careers that he's had. And now he's, bringing that to a university setting to really ideate on creativity and innovation for the future. And then Becky is an academic, researcher who works in a university, PhD, tenured faculty, full professor, who does a ton of leader development with nonprofits and organizations. So they're just I feel like they're typical ILA pracademics is a word that came out of the meeting. They're academics who also do practical things, or practitioners who do academic things. What I thought was interesting about Theo's presentation is he brought in art, and he started with a poem. And I thought that prepared people for the creative process. If you go into a creative process knowing exactly what steps you're going to take to get it done, that's not a creative process necessarily, right? So maybe free your mind a little bit. And I think so that was an insight I felt like I took away from him, is he set the stage for being comfortable, being uncomfortable in this next day. And then Becky did a bibliometric analysis. So it's a way of conducting research that you're looking at who's cited whom and what are the major themes in the leadership field over the last, she did 50, 25, and 10 years, but really focusing on the 25 mark because that's when the ILA was created. I felt like she really captured the spirit of the event. That is, how can we think about things in a really, more intentional and impactful way?
And the core of the summit were the 120 thought leaders who were there. So it was like to get all of us prepped, all of us, if you will, on the same stage. And to do that by a couple of what I would call more of a mind flexing. So what Theo did was kind of get us out of our normal ways of thinking and to do a little bit of exercise with the brain. And so to help us to think more creatively and innovatively. And so to set that stage. And then what Becky did is she did this phenomenal job of setting the stage up for us just to do our work in terms of recapping the themes and the clusters of prior leadership work for the prior 60 years, and then looking at the areas moving forward. So I think we did a little bit of mind flexing exercises with Theo, and then deepening our knowledge base with Becky. So we all started with that common core knowledge base before we then rolled up our sleeves and moved it all forward.
What did you think, Jeffrey?
I just was amazed by the mapping of research that Becky produced, and basically showed us the entire history of leadership research in the last 25 years on one chart, and fascinating connections between the research and where it has been and where it's going. So I found that absolutely really a very special moment. And the other issue from Theo, I mean, he was really thought provoking, and he came up with this just wonderful paradigm about wonder, and how wonder really helps to spur curiosity and innovation and forward movement. And of course, I think all of us participants are in wonder of 25 years, the next 25 years. That's a pretty awesome situation. So it certainly set up the scene for me as a participant to be ready for the conversations.
I appreciate your bringing that up. You're exactly right, Jeffrey. That sense of wonderment, but starting a sentence with "I wonder what." I mean, it kind of permeated the summit.
Yeah, and that then led to the meat of the conference, which was conversations in small groups along 9 different topics, and I'll list the topics in the notes to this podcast. What did you see? What was the purpose of the conversations? What kind of outcomes did you observe?
Yeah, I look at these as two different areas that really your team pulled out around. What are some of those topics, the topical areas that we discussed in the first series of breakouts, such as diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, right? Those that makes sense in terms of how we're thinking about the world right now and moving forward. Another one that came out that made so much sense in these emerging trends was the whole area around political turmoil in the world. I mean, and that came up not only in those participants from North America, it came from, of course, our European colleagues who were there and from the global south. I mean, it permeated so many different topics. And what really intrigued me were then how we looked at all of that through the lens of leadership. And your comment around diversity permeated all of those areas, right? How we think. So this interrelatedness, and Jeffrey, the whole idea of systems and interdependency. And I think we of course we only had a day and a half. We just touched on that. And I think there's so much more we can do in that area moving this forward.
Yeah, I was in the conversations that were centered around sustainability. Certainly, we were talking big systems there, planetary systems, and planetary leadership. I always was intrigued. Of course, my lens is systems, and so one of the things I picked up from Becky Reichart is that a lot of the research is going into systems in terms of how it supports leadership, and that was certainly part of the conversations that I had, both in that, and I also did the leader development conversations, which there was a lot of talk about AI in those conversations, and very rich, and I think we could have gone for much, much longer. But anyway, it was a great start.
I think a few things that I saw that I thought were interesting is, even though there were very different viewpoints in the room, and I think in most groups they had people think individually and then share, there was a lot of commonalities in what people saw as the pressing issues for the different breakouts, so that I feel like they came to maybe not consensus around like what the future should be, but that I don't know, it wasn't as different as I would have expected, right? Like if you bring people together to ideate on what the future is going to be in some area, like you can imagine quantum theory, right? There's an endless number of possibilities. But then across the groups, I feel like the themes that came out that I maybe was surprised is, the need for greater diversity, like a diversity lens on a lot of these topics, whether that's globalization, like global, or diversity within, any one cultural context. I feel it came up in every single conversation. And then just that, like the huge opportunity for collaboration across the ivory tower and the business and nonprofit sector.
Were there any particular insights that stood out for you, or the particular significance from either the keynotes or the conversations, or just the breaks in the conference, where who knows, maybe someone had an epiphany as they were thinking about what had been going on during the course of the summit.
I think one thing that struck me as surprising is, in the university setting, we call our work research and creative work. Like that's kind of how it's titled. But I think we have a real often, I don't know, maybe to speak for myself, but we really lack creativity in how we're conducting research and how we go about research, because we use existing paradigms and we try to stick really closely within our paradigm, even if it's, one theory versus another theory. And that came out of, I think, looking at Becky's bibliometric analysis, is that, we need strong paradigms. It makes sense. It allows us to understand how research is evolving. And that's, I think Becky illustrated that so beautifully. But I wonder if that limits our creativity and innovation when it comes to research. Because of the political polarization and turmoil, I guess I kind of thought people would say, DEI is dead. Like I see the, popular press articles talking about in corporations, companies are abandoning their DEI programs, and in some, at least 2 states in the US, DEI has been banned in higher education, in Florida and Texas. So I kind of thought it was going away, or there was that, I guess, fear. I didn't know if that was going to come out of the conference, that there's less of a focus on DEI, but it seemed the opposite to me, that people were, even more committed to maintaining that equity lens on whatever it is. If it's leader development, ensuring that we still have an equity lens when we're talking about developing leaders, sustainability, artificial intelligence, and how it can create greater inequity, or could it create equity? So I thought that was a surprising insight for me.
How about you, Sid?
Reflecting on those 2 or 3 days after it was completed, and as you take advantage of Boulder in Colorado, you hike or you go, visit. So for me, it was almost like coming home, because I had lived in Denver for a number of years, and so it gave me the time to reemerge myself in that beautiful location. And so hiking after the conference, some of the things that just came to me again on that high level were, you have to step back to move forward, right? We had to bring people to a common space to really then start to think about the future. And that's what Becky did, is she grounded us in very evidence-based work that everybody could relate to and understand, before we could start thinking about moving forward. That was critical. So the step back to move forward. And the other was, you have to be in the moment, but you can't get stuck in the moment. So, we all had to think collectively together at that time, but not just think about 2024. We had to think about 2034 and 2044 and 2050, right? So that was, I think, more challenging to do. Not surprising, but more challenging in terms of what we all needed to collectively do together.
What did you think, Jeffrey?
I just finished writing a blog post on my takeaways, and I had actually five major takeaways. I mean, there are many things, but the first was this whole issue of wonder, that it's the critical piece of wonder, and how that helps us to translate and wisdom into innovation and moving forward. The issue of, I was really touched by that. And then I had, well, I call it sort of like a distributed leadership and collective intelligence at the same time, because it's about getting leaders in different parts of the organization and having them coordinate. I think that it was referred to as strategic foresight as sort of like a topic, and that really struck me as being a really important part of the future. And coupled with that was something that Becky brought up, which was that we need to do more research into how systems support leaders. how do they get to become, or how are those systems helping to create the leaders that we need in our society? And that moving away from individual leadership traits, as important as those may be, to the more of a systemic approach. And then I had I love the idea of quantum stories.
Yeah.
I thought that that was really wonderful in terms of, you know, you have to have stories that can have or cover multiple futures, because we don't know what future might emerge. And to be able to tell stories that make sense, but that where the future is open. And that it's a sense of journey in which we're undertaking together to discover what that future and how it will unfold, realizing that all these multiple futures are possible and fit in within maybe a purpose and it makes sense, even though only one is really will unfold. And then the last one was the AI idea, in that AI systems. This was the conversations we had in leadership, in leader development, that AI systems need to be basically human centered. And I found that that was some food for thought for a lot of people right now. I've just recently read an article saying that 87% of AI initiatives are not meeting their objectives, and that may be because they're not being embedded in the human systems. And so something to really think about as we move into the AI age. So those are some of my takeaways from the summit. It was very, very, very rich, and as I said, we could have easily gone a lot longer. All right. Did anything surprise you? Something that you just didn't expect? That something that, you know, was an idea that just wasn't on your radar screen, perhaps?
Systems thinking isn't surprising, but the prevalence of that perspective was, I would say, unexpected. And maybe because Becky kind of teed it up at the start. I feel like I was pleasantly surprised by how hungry people felt for this type of interaction. They wanted more. They're like, so what's next? You know, what are we doing at the ILA Global Conference? And are you going to do this again next year? And how can we create more opportunities for spaces like this? I was pleasantly surprised by how engaged people were.
And I would just pick up, I think it's the pleasantly, not really surprising, but just really jazzed that a number of things really surfaced. One, this sense of the collective intelligence and everybody engaging in the space. So that collective intelligence, and it was this true thinking of thinking, being, and doing. All three of those were prevalent in the work. So I guess the second is not surprising, but pleased that these themes came up throughout, around diversity and equity and around systems and around collective thinking. And another one that I was very pleased that surfaced is we really, the thinking moved beyond the individual leader to talking about systems and distributive leadership and collective leadership and followership and thinking about competencies for the future. So that was another level, because often when you bring people together, they'll sometimes go back to some of those initial ways of thinking about leaders. And it's not that it's wrong, but it was just good to see a future thinking. So there was that leap, and hopes is that in the next iteration that we move this even further.
So talk about, you know, the objectives that you did meet, what you think was the success of the conference. And of course, the big question is, because everybody's asking apparently, what are the next steps? How does this go forward?
From the outcome of this, what we are doing is capturing the thoughts and the ideas that came forward of this into a white paper, right? And I would say that this white paper is going to collect these themes, but it'll also hopefully raise more questions than answers, right, as we think about this. So the white paper is one, but then the second is we're going to continue this conversation moving forward. This is a continuous dynamic process. Stefanie is going to lead one of our keynote plenaries at the ILA Global Conference in Chicago in November around this topic. We're going to continue to drill down and refine, and we are going to have it be very interactive with all the members who are participating in the keynote plenary. We are doing a series of podcasts and webinars moving forward on this as we continue to develop and accumulate more and more data and information and knowledge. And then we're going to have this type of summit again and building from this material into another one, but yet to be determined on timing on that part. Stefanie, do you want to elaborate more?
There were maybe some outcomes that I didn't know we would achieve that we did. So we're creating in the Journal of Leadership and Organizational Studies, which is, one of the, I think, main leadership journals out there. We're creating a special section on artificial intelligence. So we could create a special issue, and there, other journals have done special issues, or have forthcoming special issues on AI. But rather than saying we want all papers on AI and leadership to be submitted by September 2025, we're creating we created, I guess, a rolling special section that has a special editor and special reviewers assigned to it on this topic. So as papers come, people can submit it to that special section. And then they're indexed together. So if you want to see all of them, you can see all of them. And then we're creating an opportunity for the academics to provide commentaries on all of our articles in the Journal of Leadership and Organizational Studies. So that's an initiative that really came out of this conference. I think we're going to do video commentaries to make sense of, what the article says in the context of leaders and people who develop leaders and work with leaders and coach leaders, giving their thoughts. So this is a plug. If you feel like, wow, I would totally love to do that, definitely reach out to me. I'm sure our contact info will be linked in the podcast. But those are just a couple that came up that I was like, these are like really great ideas. I think there's probably more. I don't know. Jeffrey, you probably saw some ideas that came up too.
Oh yeah, no, sure. I mean, there was, one idea just off the top of my head was the use of sports leadership as a paradigm in terms of looking at teams, collectives, and also the whole issue of how teams that are well connected are usually do better than those that have superstars. And I thought that was just a very intriguing, very different approach to what I had expected. But we had someone who was deep into sports leadership, so that was very different for me. And when you get ideas like that are coming from a different field that you're usually operating in, that sparks some ideas and say, well, that's a different way of looking at it. And I think that's the kind of wonderful thing that was happening at the conference, because people are coming from different disciplines. And
yeah. I know people were really excited about. We need a conference on sustainability. The sustainability group thought we need more than this. Isn't ILA hosting a meeting on sustainability and leadership?
There is a smaller specialized conference on sustainability that is taking place in January, and it's being hosted by Johns Hopkins University. So more to come on that, but absolutely, yes. Yeah. And I think part of, Jeffrey, what you brought up is the importance of what happens when you bring individuals from different perspectives, different parts of the world, different disciplines, different work sectors together thinking about leadership. And it does stretch our own way of thinking and create new ideas. I mean, it helps with that generative process. And so I found that to be very powerful. I always find that to be very powerful.
Cynthia, maybe you could say a word or two about the upcoming conference in Chicago for our listeners or viewers who may be interested in joining this conversation, and also any other kind of conferences like the sustainability one, which are coming up in the next months or next year, perhaps.
Let me start with some of the specialized conferences. We just talked about sustainability in January. In June, there will be the Women in Leadership Specialized Conference that will be hosted at Claremont McKenna College in California. And it is developed by the Women in Leadership member community in the ILA. A very powerful, if you want to find a network of individuals who are thinking about gender leadership and women leadership, this is the conference to attend. And then the other is the Leadership Education Academy, which is an intensive 4-day program on an overview of leadership theories and approaches, and then how you integrate that into, maybe it's a new program that you're creating, designing a new course or a new leadership program, but it is powerful and impactful. And that will be happening end of July, beginning of August. But the first thing that we're having is in November will be the global conference in Chicago, and it is November 7th through 10. And the theme is Architects for Change. And as you think of the city, we always at the global conferences immerse ourselves into the culture and the context of the place. A number of the keynote plenaries, the very first one is a series of senior leadership corporate entities in Chicago who are coming together to talk about how, through their leadership and involvement, how they create change in the communities of Chicago, but then also beyond globally. It is being facilitated by Janet Foudy, who is the prior lead of Deloitte in the Americas, and also includes a senior leader from the Obama Foundation, the head of the largest utility company in the world, who is based in Chicago, and a female venture capitalist, one of the first female venture capitalists, who also serves as a trustee member at Northwestern University. Powerful panel of people talking about corporate leadership and how you impact social change in communities. And then we talked about the one that Stefanie is leading. And then the third on Sunday is around the decline of democracy, and with the decline of democracies around the world, how do we rebuild trust and peace? And again, we have some of the leading colleagues who not only research this area, also think in this area and do. So they are this combination of both individuals who study democracies, and the founder of the Economic and Peace Index from Australia will be joining us. So plus, again, the collective 300 plus presentations by ILA members that cross all different topics in the study and the practice of leadership.
Is there anything you'd like to add that we haven't discussed so far?
I said this at the conference, but I think for me, one of the biggest emotions that came out of it was gratitude. And that extends here today to you, Jeffrey, for giving us the space for this conversation. Thank you. And for, your participation, like excitement around the conference, and then being one of those key touch points to continue moving the conversation forward. Thanks for hosting us on your podcast.
And I have to thank Stefanie and her planning team. They just did this phenomenal work of making this a reality, right? Taking an idea and making it a reality, just so powerful. And Jeffrey, having us here today, thank you for that. And I had a good colleague and a friend, and every morning he would start with, "Aren't we lucky?" And that's what this makes me think about. Aren't we lucky to have the opportunity to engage in these types of conversations and move them forward? And aren't we lucky to be able to learn from and with each other around this topic? So I feel very fortunate to be here with you today. Jeffrey, thank you for asking. And Stefanie, thank you for the work you did on this summit.
Well, I want to thank both of you for participating and for sharing your thoughts on this really astounding conference that took place in August in Boulder. And I certainly think it's given food for thought for a lot of people about what the leadership challenges for the future are. Congratulations on a really successful event. Which I'm looking forward to continuing the conversations in Chicago and elsewhere.